I'll never forget the winter I spent in the old cabin up north. It was supposed to be a quiet, healing trip, a place to get away from the stress of city life and the noise that never seemed to stop. The cabin belonged to a friend of my uncle, and when I asked if I could use it for a couple of weeks, he happily agreed. It sat deep in the woods of Maine, about 2 hours from the nearest small town. The kind of place where you could step outside at night and hear nothing but the crunch of your own boots in the snow and the faint groan of trees shifting in the cold. There was no cell service out there. Just a landline in the kitchen for emergencies. When I arrived that first evening, snow had already started falling. The cabin was small, just one bedroom, a living room with a wood stove, and a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. The windows were old and drafty, but I liked that. It felt authentic, like a true escape. The first 2 days were peaceful. I spent time chopping wood, cooking simple meals, and reading by the fire. At night, the rain tapped on the roof, sometimes mixing with sleet, creating this constant white noise that made it easy to fall asleep. But on the third night, something changed. I was sitting in the living room, flipping through a book, when I thought I heard something outside. Not rain. Not wind. Something else. It sounded like footsteps crunching in the snow. I froze, listening carefully. The storm had slowed, and the sound carried clearly. Crunch, crunch, like someone slowly pacing near the porch. I told myself it could be an animal. A deer. Maybe even a fox. But the steps sounded deliberate, heavy, like boots. I set the book down and stood up, moving quietly to the window. I pushed the curtain just enough to peek through. The porch light was dim, but I could make out the snow-covered steps leading down into the yard. At first, I saw nothing. Then I noticed it. A figure standing just beyond the porch light, half hidden by the trees. They weren't moving. Just standing there, watching the cabin. I quickly let go of the curtain, my heart thumping hard in my chest. My first thought was to grab the landline and call for help, but then I remembered. The landline wasn't working. I had picked it up earlier that day just to check, and all I got was silence. So it was just me. Alone. With whoever was outside. I paced back and forth, trying to calm myself. Maybe it was just a hiker who got lost. Or a hunter. But who wanders out here in the middle of a snowstorm at night? I finally worked up the courage to look again. When I pushed the curtain open a second time, the figure was gone. At least, I thought they were. The yard looked empty. But the woods beyond the porch light were dense, and anyone could be standing just beyond that dark line of trees. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the cabin made me flinch. I kept the fire going, more for the comfort of the light than for the heat. When morning finally came, I stepped outside to check. The snow was deeper now, but the footprints were still there, clear boot prints leading from the tree line to the edge of the porch. And then back again. They never came up the steps. Whoever it was had just stood there, watching. The next few days were tense. I kept telling myself it was a one-time thing. Maybe some random drifter who passed by and moved on. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. On the fifth night, it happened again. This time, I was woken up by a sound, the sharp creak of one of the porch boards. I sat up in bed, heart hammering, straining to listen. Silence. Then, another creak. Someone was on the porch. I reached for the small hatchet I kept near the bed. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I crept to the bedroom door and peeked out toward the living room. The dim glow of the fire lit the cabin just enough to see shadows flickering on the walls. Then, a new sound. The doorknob. Slowly turning. I held my breath, clutching the hatchet tighter. The knob rattled, but the lock held. Whoever was out there tried it twice, then stopped. I didn't move for what felt like forever. Finally, after several minutes, I heard the footsteps again. crunching slowly down the porch steps, fading into the night. I stayed awake until dawn, every muscle tense, waiting for the sound to return. It never did. When morning came, I forced myself outside again. The snow told the story clearly this time. Footprints all over the porch, circling near the door. And something else. On the wooden railing, smeared in black soot, were the words, "Let me in." Seeing those words smeared across the railing sent a cold wave through me that had nothing to do with the weather. Let me in. The letters were big, scrawled with some kind of dark substance that left streaks. I leaned closer and realized it was soot, probably from the firewood pile. Whoever it was must have dipped their hand into the ash bucket near the stove, then written it on the railing. The thought made my skin crawl. That meant they had been close enough to touch my supplies. Close enough to reach into something I had used hours before. I felt sick, and I couldn't stop scanning the trees, expecting to see someone still lurking. But the woods were silent. Snow muffled everything. That day dragged on. I couldn't bring myself to relax. Every time I tried to read, my eyes drifted to the windows. I kept checking the locks on the door. I even considered packing up and hiking to the nearest road, but with the snowstorm making the trail nearly invisible, I'd probably end up lost. Or worse. The cabin was supposed to feel safe, but now every shadow in the corners seemed threatening. Night fell, and I made sure to bolt the door and slide a chair under the knob. It felt silly, but I had to do something. I even piled some wood against the back door, just in case. The fire cracked softly as I sat in the living room, straining to listen. For a long while, nothing happened. Just the gentle hiss of falling snow against the windows. I was starting to think maybe I'd be lucky that night. But then, sometime after midnight, I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow, steady, circling the cabin. My body went rigid. I didn't dare move. I just sat there, heart pounding, as the sound crunched in the snow. Sometimes close, fading toward the trees, then coming back around again. After several minutes, the steps stopped. I thought maybe they were gone, until I heard something worse. Tapping. On the glass of the living room window. It wasn't loud. Just the light tap 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 of a fingernail or a coin. Like whoever it was wanted to see if I would react. I gripped the hatchet and forced myself to look. The firelight flickered across the glass, reflecting part of the room, so it was hard to see outside. But then I saw it. A pale face. Pressed up against the window. I froze, staring at it. The features were blurry through the frosted glass, but the eyes were wide open, unblinking. The mouth stretched into the faintest smile. I ducked down, crawling toward the hallway without breaking eye contact. My breath came quick and shallow, and my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the hatchet. The tapping followed me. As I moved past the second window, I heard it there too, tap tap tap, like they were following me along the outside wall. I scrambled into the bedroom, slammed the door, and shoved the dresser against it. My only thought was to make as much of a barrier as I could. Then I sat on the floor, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. The tapping stopped. Silence again. I stayed like that for what felt like hours. My eyes were heavy, but adrenaline kept me awake. At some point, I must have drifted, because when I opened my eyes, gray morning light was leaking through the curtains. I cautiously moved the dresser and stepped out into the living room. Everything looked untouched. No broken windows, no open doors. Just the same cabin. Except when I finally looked at the window where I had seen the face, I noticed something faint on the glass. A handprint. Smudged, but definitely there. The fingers were long. Longer than normal. That morning, I seriously considered leaving. I didn't care about the storm or the distance, I felt like I couldn't stay another night. But when I packed a small bag and stepped outside, I realized how deep the snow had gotten. The trail I came in on was buried completely. Even if I could follow it, I'd be trudging for hours in knee-deep snow with no guarantee I'd make it back to the road. I told myself maybe it was safer to wait out the storm. Maybe it was all just some sick prank. But deep down, I didn't believe that. The day passed slowly again. I forced myself to keep busy chopping wood, anything to stop my mind from running wild. But every time I paused, I felt the same thing, like eyes were on me from the tree line. That night, the real terror began. I had just gotten the fire going again when I heard it, the creak of the porch boards. Slow. Drawn out. I grabbed the hatchet, heart slamming against my ribs, and crept to the window, barely moving the curtain. Someone was standing at the door. This time, closer than ever. The porch light caught just enough to reveal details, a man, tall and thin, wearing a coat that looked too big for him. His face was pale, gaunt, and he was just standing there. I backed away from the window, praying he hadn't seen me move the curtain. Then came the sound again. The doorknob rattling. This time harder. He twisted it back and forth, then started banging softly on the door. Not a knock, more like pressing his palm and dragging it slowly across the wood. "Let me in," the words were muffled, but I heard them. A whisper that made my skin crawl. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the rug, clutching the hatchet like it would save me. The whisper came again. "Let me in," longer this time. Drawn out, almost sing-song. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. All I could do was stand there as the sound went on, until finally, the banging stopped. Silence again. I stayed frozen in place for so long that my legs ached. Finally, I gathered enough courage to peek through the curtain one more time. The porch was empty. But in the snow, leading away from the steps, were deep footprints. Heading toward the tree line. Only this time, there weren't just 2 sets of prints. There were 4. 4 sets of footprints. I stared at them until my vision blurred, the icy air burning my lungs. It had always just been one person. One shadow. One set of steps circling the cabin. But now, clear as day, there were 4 sets pressed deep into the snow, branching out toward the woods. That meant there were more of them. I backed into the cabin and slammed the door shut, shoving the chair and woodpile against it again. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I could deal with 1 intruder, maybe. But 4. Out here. The thought made me feel helpless. The day passed in a haze. I didn't go outside. I barely ate. I just sat by the fire, clutching the hatchet and staring at the windows, waiting for night to fall. Every sound outside made me flinch. The trees groaning under the weight of snow, branches snapping in the distance, everything felt like it was getting closer. By late evening, the storm had picked up again. Thick flakes slammed against the windows, the wind howling through the cracks in the cabin walls. Part of me hoped the weather would keep them away. But I was wrong. It was just past midnight when it started. The first sound was faint, like a knock, but it wasn't on the door. It was on the wall. A hollow thud, near the back of the cabin. Then another thud. On the opposite wall. And another, near the window. It felt like they were testing the cabin, circling it, slapping the walls just to let me know they were there. I gripped the hatchet tighter, my palms slick with sweat despite the freezing air. The banging grew louder, more frequent. One side of the cabin, then the other, then near the roof. It was chaos, like they were everywhere at once. And then, cutting through the noise, I heard it. A laugh. High-pitched. Mocking. It echoed just outside the window, followed by another laugh, deeper this time. There were definitely more than one. I stumbled back into the bedroom and shoved the dresser against the door again, then crouched in the corner, rocking back and forth, trying to drown out the sound. But it didn't stop. For hours, they tormented me. Knocking, scratching, laughing. Sometimes whispering, though I could never make out the words. Once, I swear I heard someone dragging their fingernails across the glass of the window, slow and deliberate. And then, just before dawn, everything went quiet. No banging. No laughter. Just the muffled hiss of snow against the roof. I sat there until the first light of morning, every muscle stiff, my throat dry and raw. When I finally worked up the courage to peek outside, my stomach dropped. The cabin was surrounded by footprints. Dozens of them, circling over and over in the snow. Some were fresh, crisp. Others were half buried by new snowfall. They had been there for hours. Watching me. That day was the hardest yet. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't focus. All I could do was stare at the walls and wait. I considered making a run for it again, but the tracks around the cabin told me they knew the land better than I did. If I stepped into those woods, I'd never make it out. I thought about the landline, but when I picked it up again, it was still dead. Just static this time, like faint breathing on the other end, before silence returned. The sun sank behind the trees faster than I wanted. And with it came the dread. I barely got the fire going before the noises started again. At first, it was just the crunch of footsteps outside. Then came the tapping on the glass. The same slow, taunting rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. I refused to look this time. But they wanted me to. A loud slam hit the front door, rattling it on its hinges. I jumped to my feet, hatchet raised, eyes darting across the room. Another slam followed, then another, each one harder than the last. They were trying to break it down. Let us in. The voice was deep, guttural, and it echoed through the woods. My knees nearly gave out when I realized it wasn't just one voice. A second one followed, shrill and laughing. Then another. All chanting. Let us in. Let us in. The sound grew louder, overlapping, until it was almost deafening. The cabin shook under the force of their pounding. And then, suddenly, silence. I stood there, shaking, ears ringing from the noise. After a long moment, I crept to the window, barely parting the curtain. The porch was empty again. But this time, they had left something behind. On the steps sat a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Snow had already started to gather on it. I squinted, heart hammering, before realizing what it was. A dead bird. Its wings twisted, its body wrapped tightly in torn fabric, tied with a string. I dropped the curtain and stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. They weren't just messing with me anymore. They were sending messages. That night, I barely slept, drifting in and out, jerking awake at the smallest sound. Every time I opened my eyes, I half expected to see someone standing in the room with me. The next morning, I found more. Hanging from the porch railing were little trinkets made of sticks and string. Crude figures shaped like people, swaying in the wind. There were 5 of them. 5. I don't know why, but that number made my stomach drop. Up until then, I thought there were 4 of them. Now I wasn't sure anymore. Maybe there were more. Maybe they wanted me to know I was outnumbered. Maybe they wanted me to break. And the truth was, I already was. By the 7th day, I wasn't myself anymore. I jumped at my own reflection in the frosted window. I flinched every time the wood in the stove popped. My hands shook constantly, and I hadn't eaten anything more than a handful of crackers in nearly 2 days. I couldn't take another night. But night came anyway. And with it, the voices. This time, they didn't start with tapping or scratching. They started with whispers. Low, drawn out, overlapping whispers coming from all sides of the cabin. At first, I thought it was the wind slipping through the cracks, but the words grew clearer. Let us in, let us in, let us in. I pressed my palms against my ears, rocking back and forth, but the whispers only grew louder, climbing over each other, echoing from every wall. Then came the laughter. Sharp, shrill, too close. It rattled through the windows like nails on glass. And then, the banging. Not just on the door this time. On the walls. The roof. The windows. They were everywhere, slamming, stomping, pounding until the entire cabin shook around me. I screamed at them to stop. My voice cracked, raw, but it was drowned out by the chaos. I grabbed the hatchet, holding it out in front of me like it would make a difference, but I knew, if they got in, I was done. And that's when the front door splintered. The wood cracked down the middle, the chair bracing it snapping like a twig. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the hatchet, my whole body trembling. Through the crack, I saw an eye. Wide. Pale. Bloodshot. Staring right at me. Then another eye beside it. And another. They were all pressed against the break in the wood, peering in, their whispers hissing louder. I screamed and ran to the bedroom, slamming the door, shoving the dresser against it again. But the pounding followed. The walls shook with every slam. Dust rained from the ceiling. The whispers slipped through the cracks of the door, crawling into my ears. "Let us in, let us in. Let us in." I pressed myself into the corner, clutching the hatchet, tears streaming down my face. My mind was breaking. And then, silence. Sudden. Absolute. The pounding stopped. The whispers stopped. For the first time in days, the cabin was still. I sat there for what felt like hours, frozen in place, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. Finally, exhaustion dragged me under. My body shut down, even though my mind screamed to stay awake. When I opened my eyes again, sunlight was spilling through the curtains. Morning. I blinked, disoriented. The cabin was quiet. Too quiet. I stood, weak, my legs trembling, and slowly pushed the dresser away from the door. When I opened it, the living room looked normal. The door was still cracked down the middle, but it was standing shut, like nothing had touched it. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined everything. Then I saw the footprints. Inside. Snowy boot prints tracked across the floor, leading from the front door into the middle of the room, and then abruptly stopping. No footprints were left. Just a trail, ending in the center of the cabin. My chest went cold. I scanned every corner, my breath shallow. There was no one there. No movement. Nothing but the faint creak of the cabin settling. But the prints were real. They had gotten in. I don't remember leaving. The next thing I knew, I was stumbling through the woods, snow soaking my boots, my lungs burning from the cold air. I don't remember grabbing my bag or even putting on my coat. All I remember is running. Somehow, I made it to the road. A snowplow driver found me hours later, wandering half-conscious, muttering to myself. He took me to a hospital in town. The doctors said I was dehydrated, malnourished, and suffering from extreme stress. They asked what had happened, and I told them. But when the sheriff's deputies went out to the cabin, they didn't find what I saw. The door was intact. The windows were unbroken. The porch was clear. No footprints in the snow. No trinkets. No soot on the railing. Inside, the floors were spotless. No boot prints. No signs of anyone else ever being there. It was like nothing had happened at all. They told me I had imagined it. That isolation, lack of sleep, and hunger had made me hallucinate. And maybe they were right. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind is just right, I swear I still hear it. The tapping. Soft. Rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. Like fingernails on glass. Cabins are supposed to be escapes, quiet, peaceful places to get away from it all. But as you just heard, sometimes the silence of the woods hides things much darker than peace. This story scared you the most? Comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more true horror stories.